Good afternoon, Madam Chair Hickson, Madam Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Turner, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Renee Spence. I'm the Executive Director for the Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland. I'm here today to oppose House Bill 1603, removal of a county superintendent by county boards. I'm very sorry and distressed to have to be here today to oppose such legislation. I'm representing the 24 local school superintendents from your districts. In Maryland, our education system has ranked among the best in the nation, partially due to the support, number one, of all of you in the General Assembly, also due to the great leadership of our local school superintendents who are hired to be the instructional leaders of their districts. I'm here to say our current system is not broken and therefore does not need fixing. Actually, Maryland is the envy of many states throughout the nation. The state superintendent, as a neutral party, determines the final decision on the firing of a local superintendent. This is the way it should be. In my almost 40 years of education with local and state systems, I've only seen this legislation questioned twice. And yes, Delegate Howard, I remember the Dr. Iris Metz situation where I believe there was fighting over where the superintendent should sit relative to the board meetings. Maryland law has struck the right and correct balance in determining the roles of the local superintendent and the local board. Those roles are clearly defined. I know most of you have placed education as a top priority in your campaign and in your elections, and I know you work closely with your local superintendents. I would hope you would continue to support your superintendents and see that the role they play as instructional leader is why we are so successful in Maryland. Sustainability in leadership is a major factor of the educational success of any school system. Local superintendents need that time to show how successful they can be. And I just have one closing remark, that no superintendent should be just an election away from being hired or fired. Our system is not broken. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lasser. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Caryn Lasser, Director of Executive Services of the Howard County Public School System. My responsibilities include informing the board and the HCPSS leadership about legislation which could impact our district. The board did not reach consensus of opinion on this bill, so anyone coming before you will do so as an individual, as I am now. I'm strongly opposed to House Bill 1603, authorizing county boards of education to remove a county superintendent of schools and holding a hearing under the specified circumstances. I shared my concerns with the Board of Education of Howard County during a public meeting last week, and I'm now sharing them more fully with this committee. Currently, as you know, the state superintendent may remove the county superintendent for immorality, misconduct in office, insubordination, incompetency, or willful neglect of duty. This legislation would allow a county board or the state superintendent to remove a county superintendent for the same 5 reasons. And in my interpretation of the legislation, this will apply to Prince George's County because it's not excluded. The existing law was adopted to address criticism that local districts were infested with the vicissitudes of partisan politics. Legislators empowered the state superintendent with the ability to remove a local superintendent to alleviate local board politics. Under this bill as written, it's doubtful that a local superintendent would be afforded a fair hearing by the local board who recommended the superintendent's removal. How does the local board adjudicate itself? Once a board has determined that they want to remove a superintendent, how do they proceed with a fair, impartial due process hearing? This practice was addressed and reaffirmed by the State Board of Education in the Metz versus Prince George's Board of Education case. There's a hierarchical system in the state that currently works with the state board and the state superintendent as the final authorities on education policy and the administration of the school system. There are a limited number of high qualified superintendents in the nation. In fact, there's actually a shortage. Maryland would be placed at a significant disadvantage if it were to gain the reputation of a state where local boards routinely remove superintendents based on their most recent election, or for the whimsy or capriciousness of individual members who choose to target the superintendent for political or personal reasons. Nationally, many districts change their superintendents every 2 to 3 years. It would be hard to convince a superintendent to move their family to Maryland to be here and invest in the state when a bare majority of the board could at its whim both initiate and consummate the dismissal of that superintendent in less than 4 years. There's little hope for genuine due process if the same board that initiates the concerns would be the one that they appealed to. Additional concerns, there's a lot of case law in my testimony, and I trust that you will read that. This bill has created tremendous concern for the Howard County Public School System staff. It's impacting our ability to focus on our work. The desire by the current board to remove the superintendent is known, and it's highly unlikely that a fair hearing would be possible. The uncertainty that exists without knowing if due process will be available for the superintendent is very unsettling.
Ms. Lasser, can you summarize, please?
I am. As a statewide bill, there's growing concern about the implications this legislation would have on Maryland's top-ranked school system. And for these reasons, I respectfully request an unfavorable report.
All right, we have questions. Delegate Turner?
Yes, I think I pretty much addressed the due process question with the amendment that I just suggested, where the state board would have the right to have the final decision on termination. So I think that the due process question is a ruse at this point. I just don't think it exists. Would you agree with that? Under my current amendment that I just suggested?
It appears so. I'd like to actually see text, but it sounds like that was a concern for the due process. So if there was an appeal to the state, that would be helpful. The other amendments that were proposed in the other panel with the buyouts, things like that, those would still, I believe, from what I heard, create the uncertainty and instability that a superintendent would want to have, that Maryland now has. We are a top-rated school system due in large part to the longevity of our current superintendents and their ability to enact and see through the policy decisions that are made in collaboration with the board. And that volatility, which could occur every 2 years with different elections, are a major concern with this legislation.
No, I go through an election every 4 years. People decide, do they want to send me back? Or they can send me home. So, I mean, going through an election and making that decision, a 4-year contract's a long contract. I don't see the disconnect there, because I could very well go home and that would be the end. So, a superintendent has a 4-year contract, and, if we should be able to make a decision as to whether or not we want to keep that person, or if it doesn't work out between the superintendent and the board, well, maybe a shorter period should be the right period.
And it appears that since the same 5 criteria that exist now would be the criteria that the local board would enact on, a local board now could go to the state superintendent and say that they believe they have these grounds. The state superintendent, as a more impartial body removed from the local politics, could make that determination. And as Ms. Spence said, if it's not broken, do we need to fix it? But the local board has that ability under current law.
You said there's no checks and balances.
I did not say that.
Do you see checks and balances the way we're proposing it now? Or the bill is being proposed with the amendment?
Without
Delegate.
seeing the specific language,
Well, with the right to
It-
appeal to the state board.
I think the independence of the state superintendent is very important, and I think that was the checks and balances that I was speaking to, so that it does not become partisan politics in your local school systems necessarily affecting the performance of the state superintendent in interacting with local boards.
Thank you, Madam.
Delegate Lutke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions for you. Under current law, a school board can release almost any employee of the school system, right? I mean, if a teacher appeals out of whatever PGS it is, then the school board is the arbiter of what happens to that teacher, right?
I believe the interpretation and the recommendation would come from the state superintendent, and then the appeal would go to the board as a different body making a determination.
The board makes the determination. My question,
as
so
the second.
For firing a local school system employee, a local teacher, that would go before the local board, and then if appealed, it could go to the state board, yes.
So what's the difference? Why should a superintendent be treated any differently than other members of the school system staff?
I think the superintendent has a lot more responsibility as far as their role as the education leader of the system than any of the other staff.
But then shouldn't that at the same time speak to the need for them to have a lot more accountability?
Absolutely. And they have a 4-year contract, and superintendents can be reappointed or not reappointed.
But they can't be fired unless the state superintendent decides to invoke these 5 provisions.
Correct.
Okay. Can I ask, on the clause that relates to insubordination, what qualifies as insubordination?
I'm not an attorney. I really don't know. I mean, I can't make a list for you.
Yeah, I'd be curious whether any
I don't know the
superintendent-
definition.
Yeah,
Right.
and what it raises to me is the question of insubordination to who? Because it sounds like in the ongoing disagreements within the school system, if it's insubordination to the school board, then I think, there's a conversation that needs to happen about that. If it's insubordination to the state superintendent, it raises questions about who the local superintendent is ultimately accountable to.
And I think, Delegate Lukey, that process is currently taking place. I do think there have been appeals made to the state superintendent. If we're specifically, the state board, if we're specifically talking about the Howard County case, I do believe there have been motions and petitions submitted to the state board.
Okay,
And we're
yeah,
currently waiting that.
I don't want to get into details of personnel action, but final question. What's frustrating to me about this conversation is I think in Maryland we've worked very hard to see education as a partnership between the superintendents and the boards and the staff and the parents and the students and everyone who's involved, and that's clearly broken down in this case. So at what point should a lack of public support have an impact on a superintendent, or do you believe that a superintendent should be insulated from what the public believes in a particular jurisdiction?
I believe there's a current process in place that if that is the feeling, then the county board should go through the current process, and I believe they are doing that at this time.
But the state superintendent's not required to consider, the sort of situation in the county in terms of public support for the school system and superintendent as part of their decision-making, right?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions on this bill? If not, thank you both very much.